Good morning and welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed tea and coffee and sweets today and pastry. I wanted to give you all a quick reminder that this evening we'll have our special music performance at 7:30 sharp. The seats will be limited, so make sure when you take a break after the end of the day, the forum program, and the in between, before the music, you come back early enough to have a seat and enjoy the performance. Today, when our program ends and after our closing remarks, we will do guided tours together as 3 groups. We will divide into 3 groups and go explore the galleries as a group together and enjoy some time talking there before we all go spread around to take some rest. I also wanted to announce that Ed Kashi's opening gallery will happen on Sunday in Culture Factory at 5 p.m. So for those of you who would like to join us back on Sunday, excuse me, please be there by 5 p.m. We have a very special gallery prepared for him inside Culture Factory Esta Gallery. The book fair will continue for 2 more days. If you have not had enough time to explore all of our wonderful publishers these past 3 days, you can come back tomorrow and the day after because it will continue for 2 more days. Right now, our first session will start. It's a craft conversation between Dr. Alana Marie LaBrosse and Honora Spicer. Alana Marie is an assistant professor of English at the American University of Iraq Sulaimani and founder of its Art and Culture Center, Kashkul. A poet, translator, and Kurdish literature scholar, she has translated numerous Kurdish works into English, including Kajal Ahmed's Handful of Salt, Abdullah Bashir's Dictionary of Midnight, and Farhad Pirbal's The Potato Eaters. Honora Spicer is a PhD candidate in history at Harvard University. She researches state building in borderlands in the 19th and 20th century United States and is currently writing post-bond postal constructions of borderland space in El Paso, Texas, 1848-1967. She writes about documentary poetry in the series Architecture of Disappearance in the poetry journal Jacket 2. She is an assistant editor and coordinates community projects at Cardboard House Press, which publishes Latin American poetry in translation. Through the project Countermapping in Poetry, she researches, translates, and leads workshops on poetry and mapping. Thank you both. Please come on in.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here in this space with you.
Good morning, everyone. It is really an honor to be on this stage where so many of my personal heroes are in the audience, and so many of my personal heroes have already taken the stage. Thank you for having me.
I am really excited to talk broadly about what it means to write poetry as a means of being in relation, and what it means for a book of poetry to be an artifact of that process. We'll center our conversation on this amazing book, Dream State, a Commonplace Book that was published this year by Unnamed Press. And I'm wondering if we can begin by just thinking about how the book opens in the first few pages, which come even before the title page, and why you chose to open the book in this way.
Yes. So I'll try to do a little show and tell here. So we have dream state. So the book begins with a little glyph. How many of you recognize it? Anybody? Okay. What about this? Do you recognize this? Yes, we recognize that. What about this? And that's how we come to the title. So for me, it was very important to... This is a book for the West, written in English, although sometimes Kashkol teases me that I wrote it more for Kurdistan than I thought I did. Maybe so. But it's a book written primarily to be looking at ideas of location, dislocation, what dislocation does to us, and how location is a continual process. So I wanted to start the book by saying, this is a glyph you may not be able to read. This is a glyph you think you recognize. Here is a glyph that you cannot find on a map, but many people do recognize it, and it's incredibly important to them. So I wanted to be able to set up that progression before even the first, and it was almost an accident when it happened. So for 10 years, 15 years, I've been drawing that glyph, saying, okay, you think you know the map. Here's the map, right? Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria. It's backwards for you guys, sorry. And then when my publisher saw me draw that, he was like, wait, whoa. That's really helpful, because it takes a map I think I know as a Westerner, and it changes it into a map that I didn't know. It helps me unsee it and then re-see it. So he actually asked if we could incorporate that in the book because he found it so helpful in terms of unlearning, relearning, locating, relocating.
And I think the two words of the title play a similar function in terms of the embedded meanings. In English, I think these two words have at least three meanings when they're next to each other, the first being a state of dreaming or a condition of being in a dream. The second being a state dreamed of, and the third being the dream of being able to state, or the dream of being able to say something. And I'm curious about how, in a way, this book is a study of what these two words are doing next to each other. And it's this attention to what happens when these words are beside each other. And I'm curious how that process of working with these two words as the title came about.
Thank you, Nora, for all of your generous attention to this book and this conversation. The title poem, Dream State, actually came about because I was so dislocated. So I had been in Mosul in an IDP camp running an oral history project with young Moslawis for the university, for them with the University of Mosul. Then very quickly I was on a flight to Sri Lanka, and I woke up in the middle of the night in Sri Lanka. I was supposed to be on vacation, you know, like, what's that? How do I even recognize that? And I kept hearing noises that were not, that my mind kept saying, oh, this is where you are. You're in Kurdistan, you're in Mosul, and then a second later, after I was a little more awake, I'd be like, no, you're not there. That's not the mosque calling, that's not the muezzin. Where are you? And my mind kept having to hear things for the first time and then make sense of them in this cyclical way. So the title poem in some ways is actually about the incredible dislocation, how sometimes we experience so much reality all at once, so concurrently, that it actually becomes surreal, that existence feels very far away. Nali says, my existence has become non-existence. That's something that I really love and feel. So that's where the title started. But of course, the resonance with the politics, with the aspirations, with the pain of the permanent dislocation, the intentional separation of a people is also in that word. And then I also loved, Nora, I wondered if you wanted to share a bit about your work and the way that, especially in 1920, 1930s America, you have found through your research the development of the nation state actually strengthening documentary poetics, because I think that would really fit here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I find this title and the general work of what a poet does in studying proximity, whether that's proximity in the built environment or the proximity of two words together. Right now, the two words that I'm working with are post-bond, which I first saw on the wall of a prison in El Paso, and post-bond refers to an instruction of how to make a payment in order to be released from prison. And that's something that the current administration has recently eradicated the possibility of. But this was an immigration prison, and I became really interested in what these two words were doing next to each other. How a bond is also a financial term of a mechanism of selling, in the United States, in many cases, indigenous land in order to pay for wars of conquest of that land. So implicit in those two words together also has to do with this posting forward of unimagined future state, in this case, that's being gambled on. And at the same time, those two words together mean post as in after, like a time after bond or bondage or imprisonment. So there's this kind of abolitionist future that I think lives inside those two words side by side at the same time.
And as I've talked with you about your work, if I may interrupt, one of the things I loved and thought had a lot of resonance in this context was you achieve your dream state at what cost? Nothing comes without cost. So when we achieve dream state, we may think of it as the thing we've wanted for a very long time. In the United States, what Nora shared with me just last night was that the American dream occurred at the cost of widespread genocide. So it's an interesting idea to think about, what are you gambling on? What future are you pinning your hopes and dreams on? And what might the hidden costs of it be? I thought that was a really interesting moment in American history to bring into this context.
Yeah, and I think, sorry.
No, it's okay.
In terms of the question of what, we can talk some about, or we will talk about how this book is part of a long lineage of documentary poetry or poetry of witness, and how in English this comes about at really a very particular moment. I would say, in terms of what I'm writing right now, this is in the 1930s. The United States passes the first law that makes an immigration violation a federal crime in 1929, and creates the first federal network of prisons in 1930. This is the same time when a network of sending mail by airplane enables the transmission of documents within this prison network faster than prisoners can be transported. And then in 1934, the National Archives are created, so kind of implicit in the process of creating an archival regime is the process of using documentation in order to create exclusionary territorial borders. The prison that I'm studying in relation to this is right on what is currently the US border with Mexico, and 80% of the people in prison there are people who are, their home is on both sides of the river that is being made into a territorial border. And so it's in that context, a lot of poets consider Muriel Rukeyser one of the mothers of documentary poetry, this mode of using poetics to, I would say, reconstitute a multiplicity of language that has been torn apart by these modes of archiving.
A multiplicity of languages that might even be considered a threat to eradicate from the emerging nation state. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that this brings us to also what is the role of the poet in responding to these archival regimes. And one thing that is really prominent in this book has to do with trust, which makes me think of, is also like bond is a financial term that can be transactional in the process of state building, and at the same time is and more importantly is a relational term. And I'm curious to hear more about that process of trust and what it means kind of against this state-building archival regime of violence, to think about trust in these other ways that you are in this book. Yes,
great question. So over the last few days, I've been taking notes on all of your panels, every conversation, every reading. You all have been phenomenal. And I wanted to share a few of the quotations that have been really helpful to my own thinking about my work going forward. Nina Karimi, I know she's here today. Yesterday she said, representation is a process. There she is. Representation is a process. Identity is not fixed. It is also a process. Right beside her, Mr. Abbaswali said, the whole idea of identity without an other is, and I didn't catch your exact word, but the sense was incomplete. The practice of power, identity is relational, you said. And then not, 5 minutes later, it felt like to me, but I'm sure it was at least an hour or two. Shook said, translation is a relational art. So even though we've been separated, all of us, and feeling the need to connect across borders, across variants of Kurdish, which are very real demands of the discipline of Kurdish studies, it was interesting to me to hear how much we are already in conversation with each other. That was really heartening to me. And then I also wanted to pull out Fatma Sevci's a quote from her session in the morning. She was talking about when she was imprisoned in Turkey for writing poetry in Kurmanji. And she said we would watch because in autumn the leaves would fall on the walls, and just that symbol of the leaf on the wall felt like freedom to me. And then she said it was a small symbol, and I thought, nope, seems like a very big symbol to me. And she said, But freedom is freedom from myself. I am the person who exists here. I can't just change myself as if I'm a shirt. And I loved this idea because I've thought about identity quite a lot. Because I'm an American, I arrived here in 2011. The war was still ongoing. In parts of the country, it was raging and really, really destructive. And part of the reason I did come here to teach at the American University was because I thought, I don't want to be part of the war process, but I would like to be part of the peace process. I'm an educator, I'm a teacher. I thought, what better place to do that than at the American University of Iraq-Slimani? But I can't change myself like I'm a shirt. In fact, it's really important to say, I am the person who exists here. It's very important, as I'm calling you Mr. Valley, but Dr. Shekhyan Valley said, it's really important for me to know what my position means, what it may mean for who I'm sitting with, and what it may mean for the conversations that are possible, perhaps even what I need to apologize for or heal through my relationship with a particular individual who's sitting in front of me. So every room I enter, I have to remember who I am and where I am, and then I have to hope that I can co-create a space of trust over time with someone as an individual so that we can actually talk about the things that matter, so that they'll trust me to tell the stories that will really change the world. Slowly, but maybe. Yes, would you like me to read?
I would love to hear the second poem in the book, which is called The Bookman.
Yeah. It's a huge honor for me to read these poems. I may not be able to look over in this direction because this poem was written for Bin Keijin. The Bookman. As I read and work to understand, the bookmen watch. They decide when and how to give me the next book. It is easy to remember I work in darkness and read only scraps. Sense is an illusion that sometimes shimmers and dissipates. In the darkness, I hear echoes that speak the great space around me. The bookmen have been jailed and beaten for their libraries, which were used as evidence at trial, then burned. They ask that books be their payment for delivering the unsteady calf or a Friday sermon. They read as they went blind, and after what they had, they learned by heart. Cities were gassed, the language outlawed, families splintered. What scraps were found, the bookmen sewed into new bindings. Context was lost and made, and the words lived on, even perhaps only in misunderstanding. In some ways, it is better to be forgotten. To work in the dark is to truly work. The bookmen keep their catalogs a secret. A catalog can be a checklist. What is left to sell, burn, prosecute. So the bookmen watch. They watch me to see what I do with each revelation, to see if I merit the next words. They wait to see what I can become.
Thank you.
Of course.
I'm struck thinking about how there's so much within this poem, and the role of beginning and ending with, I read and work, they wait to see what I can become. And the role in this book of making present that it makes me think about, recently I was in the National Archives in the US and came across some documentation of the Immigration Service circulars directing administrators to not use the first person in their correspondence. And also directives to send documents in individual envelopes by subject category as they would be cataloged, such that documentation about regulation of land was separated by envelope before it's even sent from documentation of regulation of people. And part of what this book is doing and is participating in a genre of poetry that is interested in how the poem convenes this space where the I is present and is present with others. And I think this comes about through the process by which this book was written, that also involves oral history as a means of record keeping that is very different from what I'm describing. And I'm curious if you can talk some about that, the role of oral history and those experiences in writing this book.
Yes, I can. I will try. When I first arrived in Kurdistan, I was very excited because I don't like duplicating work. Anyone who's working really hard isn't looking to do again what someone else has done. They want to look at what someone else has done and then take it further. What's next? Where can we go now? So one of the things I was most excited about when I arrived in Slimani was to see who's doing archival work. I met Sheikh Mohammed Ali Karadaghi, who's obviously a force of nature in the field. I also got to meet Bin Kejin. And I say that as a whole because they operate as a collaborative, just like Kashkol. So even if you look at the leadership, and I'm putting that in quotations only because they wouldn't want it, they work very egalitarian there, and it's one of the things I love about them. They invited me in automatically. They were incredibly welcoming, both Sheikh Mohammed Ali Karadaghi and Bin Kejin. And they gave me the first round, but I thought it was all. Because that's the way Western archives work. That's the way Western libraries work. You walk in, you say, this is my topic. A computer spits back at you a very long list of titles you can track down. Then you go into the stacks, you find all the books, maybe you get lucky, and by chance you see some books around the ones you initially were seeking that are helpful to you. Wonderful, great, now you know you can go do your research. Here the process is different, because again it comes back to the central word of trust. Here, these archives are personal, and here's the reason why. It's not because people are hiding things from you. It's not because their egos are big and they're trying to make sure they keep you in your place. No, it's because they've lived through cyclical violence on a 10 to 20-year time frame their entire lives. So when I got here in 2011, everything was really peaceful, everything was going good. The Kurds were in their golden decade, so to speak, right? Come on, you guys have had golden centuries. In 2014, I watched as the collectors around me played a shell game to protect their collections. I watched it happen, and I realized the reason they keep their catalogs carefully protected is because they serve as a checklist. The Islamic State, or the next person who comes, will say, oh, good, so glad you made that checklist public. We printed it out before we even told you we were here. Now we know exactly what you have, we know exactly where it is, and the valuable things we will take and sell on the black market, and it will serve our cause. And the things we don't care about, we will burn in the street. Astaghfirullah. And that's what I'm saying, not what they say, obviously. And so it's this tremendous balance for people who are trying to preserve archives, and archives are a source of identity. So they're not just trying to preserve archives, they're trying to preserve the Kurdish ability, the global ability to ask, what does it mean to be Kurdish? And also, what does it mean to be human? They're trying to protect that by saying, let's establish some trust. Who are you? When we give you information, when we give you resources, show us what you can do with it. Once we see what you can do with it, yes, here's some more. Isn't that lovely? So it's a much more personal process, but it's not because of any sort of, nothing nefarious is happening, nothing malicious is happening. It's actually something quite critical to the survival of the discipline of Kurdish studies. So that's a really interesting part of how Kurdish people have addressed the cyclical violence they survive and still have continued preserving resources to help themselves and others think about what does it mean to be Kurdish. And that's very much where this poem came from, is, you know, the leadership at Jean, the Karadahi family, they would just sit with me for hours and talk with me for hours and teach me about the modes of preservation that I hadn't been able to recognize before I came here. I can talk more about oral history too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what you're speaking about has to do with temporality and how the state is not just a place or a potential place, but a time and a sense of being in time together. And part of the time of this book is also generational time. I wonder if we can hear after 2003 and then talk more about that process of oral history.
Yeah. So I began oral history. Wait, no, we talk after. I love it. No talking, no introduction. All I will say is the gentleman who gave me this interview is sitting in the audience today. I may not be able to look at him because I am so grateful to him for everything he does for Kurdish culture. And of course, he's a dear friend. He sat with me for hours and spoke with me about his experience as a new generation bookman. So I'm going to name him. Halo Farik gave me this interview. I edited it down into what it is now. So this is a collaborative poem, a collaborative documentary poem, honoring the new generation of bookmen and women who are rising today. After 2003, Kurdistan opened to America, the West. So, what do new things mean? It's not easy to say. Freedom was new. Talking Kurdish was new. Murakami, Kundera, Borges, I read a lot. Before I began to translate, I was just like any other reader, sitting at home and reading. But then, when my English was good enough, I thought, Halo, don't be selfish. It's selfish to sit at home and do what you love. So I started translating to give others the chance to read these great novels. Training as a soldier did not make me who I am. It made me stronger. But books made me who I am. Books make me a human being again. They open my mind wide. Before books, I didn't know the whole world. Media says what it wants. The true world is not on TV, screens, social media. It's out there. Out there. Books give us the true world. I read and I translate on the battlefield. When I have a cabin or a tent, I translate. When I don't, I go under the truck and read. There's no shadow, no breath, except under the car. The Islamic State dies for paradise. Yepika dies for their homeland. Both sides have nothing to lose. So these battles are like nothing I have ever seen. This is hard to say, especially on camera, but I've wept for the Islamic State. I see them as victims, victims of political ideas, as Peshmerga are, victims. After each attack, when you're a commander, you have so much work to do. Reorder rockets, clean the weapons, I give my men their tasks, I go to my cabin, I lock the door, I weep. I joined to help. All I've ever wanted is to help. That's why I joined. I'm not sure what we're doing anymore. I deal with death on the battlefield, but I do not work for death. I work for life. The more you think about God and heaven, the less you think about humanity. My religion is to look down, not up. I stopped praying my first week in the battlefield fighting ISIS. When Peshmerga launch a rocket, they say, Allahu Akbar. When the Hashid launch a rocket, they say, Allahu Akbar. I agree. God is great. But for whom? The work I do, that's my prayer now. Even my rest is in my work. You don't need to sit and pray for what we've lost, what we're about to lose, when so much remains.
I think this poem relates to the third meaning of the title that came to mind in terms of what does it mean, what is the role of stating in state making, what is the role of saying, and I would love to hear more about that, the thread of saying and of orality within this book.
So I'll tell a funny story. When I first moved to Kurdistan, I knew I wanted to translate. That was definitely part of my reason for coming. I was a young poet. As Chris Merrill mentioned yesterday, I had heard the advice from one of my professors, if you want to be a poet, go translate. Shackle yourself until you're sick with it to someone who has mastered things that you would like to learn to master. You know, I was thinking about Fatma saying, I'm not a shirt that I can just change. And I was thinking translation is maybe one way we can try on someone else's clothes and see how they fit. So I was thinking about who to translate. I was asking my students. And there was this one name, this one poet's name. And whenever someone said it, they would giggle. I'd be like, that's a reaction I have never seen before. Just somebody's name, a poet, and everybody's giggling. What's going on there? So I thought to myself, who is this Shahraza? And so I kept asking people, and finally one young woman in my class said, Miss, he is a very special poet because he says what we cannot say. And I thought, I wonder what that means to her. What does it mean to have someone say something because cannot here is an interesting word, isn't it? Maybe it was should not, but what she said was cannot. What does it mean to have a poet say something that you feel you cannot say? And what, in Kurdistan in particular, is the role of poets to say what we cannot say? To be bold and courageous where we maybe are a bit more retiring. Then, of course, I started to translate Shahraza, and I was like, oh boy, I really started at the top of the mountain. I just tried to start right at the top of the mountain. I fell all the way down that mountain. I climbed all the way back up. If you really want to test yourself on the masters. Basar Chow, I absolutely did. He is absolutely a master. He's very difficult to translate. And also a total joy. Because when someone challenges you, it's actually more fun. So, yes. So when we think about the role of stating in a dream state, it is important to think about, what have I told myself I cannot say? Are those perhaps the most important things for me to consider stating, saying, making real? I've actually seen a lot of people in this audience do that on this stage. State things that were hard to state and real. And that made me feel the forum was doing its job. So thank you to all of you for coming and being part of the dream state.
This makes me think about something that the historian who I'm studying under told me, which I was asking kind of, how do I construct an argument in writing a history? And he said, none of my books have arguments. They just state things that happened one after another in great proximity, and the result is, can you even believe this? And I think that that's something we've talked about in terms of what is field work, is a means of making observations and kind of merely stating what is already taking place or what is before the poet. So I wonder, as a final question, if you could talk some about that process of field work and of observation.
Yeah. So Kashkul began doing oral history when the Islamic State moved into the city of Mosul, which, as we all know, was this beautiful, pluralistic city, and still is. But the university was thinking amongst ourselves, how can we help the University of Mosul begin to recover? In 2016, we'd all been watching with sorrow and grief as things unfolded in Mosul. And as 2016 happened and coalition forces were moving through, the university and Kashkul were thinking about, how can we help this great university recover? How can we be haukarakan with our dear colleagues? And one of the things that we realized was that the history of this time period, really of any time period, is written in these broad, aerial strokes. And we realized what we really wanted to do was practice oral history, was say, let's actually get to know people one at a time. Let's give them a lot of time. Let's sit with them multiple times over the course of 2 years. Let's have at least 15 hours of a lifetime interview with each person, again, a process of building trust, so that the history of this can begin to be idiosyncratic, not what we think happened, not what the journalists are telling us, although journalists are very valuable, but even deeper, what can oral history show us on the level of the individual? To do oral history, again, is a real trust-building exercise, but it's also a great discipline. So, I am never anywhere without taking massive field notes. Every day is my field day. And because of that, I have little pieces of grass that have been brought to me by my child. Because of that, I have notes for meetings next to notes for poems, next to more flowers from Kurdistan, obviously, and then next to interpreting notes from the interviews themselves. My pen is never not moving when I'm in the field. And one of the things that felt really important to us, to me, but also to Kashkul, as we did these oral history projects, was not to, yes, the foreign helps in some ways. One of the great things about working at the American University of Iraq Slimani is we get to play the insider and the outsider card, which is very powerful. And so when I was going into these environments, we were getting teams of young Moslawis who were interested in learning the discipline of oral history and wanted to be part of rebuilding their city, not through the roads, but through their minds, through their imagination, because both of these processes of rebuilding are essential. If you have hospitals, but the mindset is still in 2014, the hospitals don't matter. If you have the mindset, but not the hospitals, the mindset matters, but the body really needs some attention. So together, we participated, Kashkul did what it could by saying, let's train a whole generation of young Moslawis to do this for themselves, to do this for their own city. We then did the same thing in Shingal Lives. So I told Nora, when I start talking about fieldwork, cut me off because I'll talk about it forever. Because I really think the best thing for young people to do is get in the habit of constant observation. Observing yourself, observing others, going back over time and observing what your observations were and seeing how they've changed and grown. The reason is, so Chris Merrill was saying yesterday that W.S. Merwin said, Pound said write 75 lines a day. And you know, we're like, okay, be merciful. If you can't write 75 lines of new poetry a day, what do we do next? And Pound said, translate. I would also put out there, if you can't translate on any given day, go observe and write whatever you see. Tracy Fuad's poetry yesterday showed us that she was just writing down the things that she saw in CTEC. These were very tangible things. When she says the line, I'm Tracy, I'm sorry, I'm gonna paraphrase your poem, which is like the worst thing a poet can do to another poet. But she said something like, the older something is, the farther down it is buried. This is a statement of fact, like your professor was saying. This is a statement of what is true in the archaeological record. It is also a statement of how pain works. It is also a statement of how shame works. It is also a statement of how difficult it may be to return to your history and come home. All of these are huge themes in Tracy's work, but she got to it by simply observing and writing what she saw. So, if you can, obviously, you'll be my hero, write 75 lines a day. If you can't, translate, you'll be my hero. If you can't, go write field notes. Go to Bakhegashti, write what you see. Go to Bakhegashti multiple days in a week, write what you see. Observe the same thing you think every time, and then see if your observations change. If you observe the same thing and your observations are different, what changed? Maybe you. Observe that too. So I think field notes are very, very powerful, and I think particularly for poets who want to think about the location of that I, that kind of work is critical. Without it, you can't locate this person over and over and over again in different contexts and different time periods.
Mm-hmm. Can we hear one last poem in English?
Sure. Which one would you like to hear?
There is no Kurdish nation.
Okay. This one is a little bit longer, but this is a verbatim poem, just like the one you heard me recite from Hollow. So over the years, maybe I've done 18 interviews with Sheikh Mohammed Ali Karadahi. He's been incredibly generous with me. Really, all my Kurdish mamostak, like all of you have been just so generous with me. So this is a verbatim poem cobbled together from many, many, many years of interviews with him. There is no Kurdish nation except in the manuscripts we have. Berlin, Baha, London, Istanbul. Each city tells us the story of where history has taken our culture. One book references another. Back and back and back we go. I began collecting in 1970. I was married in 1971. My son was born in 1972. My first book was published in 1973. In 1976, the Republican Guard confiscated what I'd collected. Anthologies of poetry were criminal evidence against me in my trial. Of all the jail's possessions, human beings were cheapest. I thought of nothing. Of course, I expected death. Many experienced worse. The sentence eventually handed down was for 6 months imprisonment. I'd already served 9. They let me go. They still owe me 3 months. I returned immediately to collecting, warmer to the work. Now, I keep the book secret. At times, I split the library up between locations. There is no income. It is hard work. I preached as a mullah first in Baghdad, then here in Slemani. I trade sermons for manuscripts. People give me papers, asking me only to analyze and publish. I have written 40 books, more than 70 volumes. If I sense spirit in a young person, I push them to pursue the work. I have started a revolution this way, a revolution that is more difficult than the political. It is easy to stand on television and say, we are Kurds. It is difficult to find a vision of what Kurd means. Sincerity must drive the work. Yes, it weighs on me. The work is too heavy. I carry it only by the prayers of my teacher, Sheikh Abdul Karim. He told me, you are the past's tongue. He gave me permission to teach. He taught my son. In this house, when we say teacher, we mean only Sheikh Abdul Karim. When Daesh pushed on Haller, we prayed, please, God, don't will this. We've been digitizing our archive for 15 years. My son wrote the first Kurdish font for an IBM. There are hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts now. We couldn't leave them. That's a goat skin. My son's friend inscribed it for us. It is a verse from the Quran. All I am, all I have, is a gift from God.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Shanae's going to bring us the iPad.
Great. Thank you. We have a question for you about translation. How was the process of translating from a language you were about to learn? What helped a lot? And how has that process changed your thinking about Kurdish language and literature? What else needs to be done about Kurdish literature that we are still lacking?
Oh boy, let's
Four
take that one
questions.
question at a time. Okay, the first question is how, say it again, how does,
The process of translating a language you were about to learn.
how gently phrased. Someone phrased that question so gently out there. How is it to translate from a language you are about to learn? So, one of my favorite translators who happens to be in this audience and who spoke from stage yesterday, Shook says all the time, Shook speaks 17 languages. Whenever I say this to someone, Shook says, oh, please no, I'm just learning English. Now, I know this is their personality, and also it's their reminder to themselves that they are always a student of their languages, always a student. So one of the themes that you'll see in this book is how much Islam and Sufism are still, as we heard from the panel on the very first day, are still integral, always have been and remain, integral to the cultural and preservation ecosystems in Kurdistan. I have been welcomed into these communities in ways that I'm incredibly grateful for. Sufism teaches us it's not only there's no shame in being a student, it's that it's the only way to learn. So if we say all of us are students of all language, even the languages we feel most comfortable with, that gives you a place to begin. Now, if you can't begin, you're nowhere. So the task ahead is impossible. Translation's impossible. Okay, I agree. Then what? Do you let it stop you? Or do you find a way to begin as transparently as you can? That's why I'm so transparent in my publishing. All of these verbatim poems, are attributed. Now, behind these verbatim poems that are only a page or 2 pages long are hours and hours and hours of interviews that I did with these people, all with interpretation, all with subsequent translation, and then with significant editing. So there are lots of decisions in this text that are at work. Begin somewhere, and then be as clear and conscious about your decisions as you can. Do not let the impossibility of a task, like learning a new language, like beginning to translate your favorite poem, do not let that impossibility prevent you from beginning. To me, that's the most important. So you fail, great, we're all failing. Fail better, fail more beautifully, fail consciously. Have friends who actually help you see your failures for what they can become. Any other part of the question I should address?
I think the forum as a whole is addressing a lot of these to continue being in conversation about. I'm wondering if we can conclude with the 2 poems recently published in Kurdish from this book.
Of course. So I would really love to acknowledge the work of Balinda in Slimani. They're just such a wonderful publisher. They're really changing the face of Kurdish literature, translating things into Kurdish and publishing them quite quickly with a really beautiful editorial oversight and involvement, engagement. So I'd personally like to thank Briar M. Tahir for his work and Balinda for his work, because I really do feel it's, again, another sister-brother organization to ours in the values we share and the sea change we're trying to make in Kurdistan with all of you in collaboration. With that, I would really love, we know we have the term bradar. I'd like to introduce a new term. I'd like to invite my khoshekdar to the stage, Ms. Shane Mohammed, because these are her translations. We'll read them together at the podium for you.
You gave. Volume okay? You gave the lie a mouth, so it loved you and stayed. Shouting at it only made it giddy. No one had ever spoken to it before. You were better than a mirror, better than a reflection. You were a body built like a sparrow to bear and be marked by. Every idea the lie could, it loaded onto you. It adored you, but gave you nothing. And when the lie returns, it always does. You're the only home it's ever known. Its adoration will be anger. Its emptiness will sound like accusation. Don't argue. There is no reassurance, no love enough for a lie. There is no way to rid yourself of a lie. Only stop giving it your mouth.
سپاس بۆ شاڵە و حەبیبەش سەرەتاکەم شارانم وەرگێرا بۆ شاڵە و حەبیبەم نرد و ئەویش بە پیاچوونە و چاوی خۆی شارەکانی لە باڵندە پڵاو کردەوە. سپاس بۆ باڵندەش. تۆ زارت بە درۆ بەخشی بۆیە خۆشی ویستی و لەلات مایەوە. بە هاوارکردنە سەری گێژ دەبوو پێشتر هیچ کەس نەیهێنا بۆ قسە. تۆ باشتر لە ئاوێنە و لەوێنەش ژەستەیەک بوویت وەک چۆلەکە هەڵکەوتوو بۆ هەڵگرتنی دووشانی تەنراو بە شوێنەواری درۆ. ئەو شەیدات بوو هیچیشی پێ نەبەخشیت. ئەو کاتێ درۆ دەگەڕێتەوە لات کە هەمیشەیش دەگەڕێتەوە بۆ تەنها نیشتیمانە ئاشناکەی خۆی. شەیدایی دەبێتە تووڕەیی، بۆشی دەبێتە متمانە، بۆشی دەبێتە تۆمەت. مەدوێ لەگەڵەوانی وا بێ ئومێد بوون بۆم درۆیە هیچ دڵنەواییەک، هیچ خۆشنویستنێک بەس نییە. هیچ ڕێگایەک نییە بۆ دەرباز بوون لە درۆ جگە لە لێسەندنەوەی ئەو زارەی پێت داوە.
The last poem we'll read for you today is Drought. After the day's last call to prayer, there is no external marker of night passing. Only me, alone, slowly turning to water. The evening helps me out of my skin, as if out of a taxi or a coat. And all that was contained, all that I held together, I let loose. Still, I could throw all the water I am at the desert below and not be enough for a sapling. I wish I could spend my life as a brain in a jar. I put a tomato in my mouth. I test its skin. How breakable, how spillable everything is inside. I love the sudden water of the skin pulling back. I hate the breaking, and I love the water.
وشکە ساڵ پاش کۆتا بانگی نوێش هیچ نیشانەیەکی تێپەڕینی شەو نامێنێت. تەنیا ئەم لەسەرخۆ بە ئاوبوونەی من نەبێت. ئێوارەی یارمەتی هاتنە دەرەوەم دەدات لە پێستی خۆم، وەک هاتنە دەرەوەم لە تاکسیەک یان هاتنە دەرەوەم لە چاکەتەکەم. هەموو ئەو شتانەشی هەڵم گرتوون دایان دەنێم، هەمووانی لە خۆم گرتوون ئازادیان دەکەم. هێشتا گەر هەموو ئاوبوونی خۆم بڕێژمە نێو بیابانی ناوەوە، نەمامێکیش تێر ئاو ناکەن خۆزگە بە ژیانی مێشکێکی هەڵگیراوی ناو قوتو دەخوازم تەماتەیەک دەخەممە ناو دەممەوە سانایی تەقینی بەرگەکەی سانایی پرژانی هەموو ئەو شتانی لە ناویدا دەپشکنم حەز بەو ئاوە ناکاوەی پاش کرژبوونەوەی بەرگی تەماتەکە دەخەم حەز بۆ ئاوە ناکاوەی پاش گرژبوونەوەی بەرگی تەماتەکە دەکەم ڕقم لە تەقینەکەی و حەزم لە ئاوەکەیەتی